Hello everybody, this is Graeme, and today I'm going to be looking at La Famiglia, the Great Mafia War. Now this game takes place during the 1980s in Sicily, where a merciless battle raged between mob families to take control over this Italian region. Now each player takes on the role of one of these mob families, who's going to team up with another player to hopefully divide up the land and win. Now this is a 4-player only game. While you're playing in pairs, you'll win or lose as a team. But each player does control a different family with asymmetrical powers, but you'll be coordinating your actions to weaken, then hopefully take over your opponent's areas. In essence, it's an area control game, where you're going to have soldati in different areas and then use them to take over neighboring areas to try and take over the emendamenti, or regions. Collect so many regions and you win the game. Now each round is split into 2 phases. First you plan, where you're going to be moving influence markers from one board to an empty action space on another board. Or you can clear out an entire column and take a special action. Once all the actions have been done, you go into like an encounter phase, where you're going to be executing any orders that were issued during the planning phase. Now, honestly, when I first bought this game, I was kind of wondering why I did buy it. I'm not a huge fan of the Mafia theme, nor am I a big fan of area control. But I do like asymmetrical powers. I also kind of like the team play. And honestly, I like these publishers' black label games, which tend to be a bit more on the complex side. So, will this game be like the dawn of games and rule them all? Or will it just end up sleeping with the fishes? Let's get it to the table, see how it's played, then we'll come back with my final thoughts on La Famiglia, the Great Mafia War. This is Famiglia's setup. It is a 4-player only game, but I am only showing you one side of the pieces due to the amount of table space this game takes up. Since players are in teams, these 2 players are partners. During this overview, I'll be skipping a lot of the rules, so use this just as an overview of how the game works, not a how to play. All the neutral parts and coins are placed beside the board. The action sheets are stacked in order from 1 on the top to 4 on the bottom. One team randomly pulls a set of control tiles, and the other team will take the same control tiles. The players decide who will be what colors and take the appropriate mat and pieces along with their player shield. Again, due to space, I'm only showing one player shield here. Anything behind your player's shield is considered to be in your headquarters. You'll then take your order sheets from your opponents so you can understand what their possible orders are. On a player's mat, they will start with all the advanced orders. These are the ones that do not have a dot on the left-hand side on their appropriate spots. The basic orders go behind your player screens. Again, those are the ones with a dot on the left side. Next, place your 17 influence markers to cover all the appropriate spots on your player board. Your family mat or your player board is made up of 4 different roads. Each represents influence in different areas: justice, police, economy, and the church. During the game, as you remove your influence markers, you can unlock maybe one-time benefits, ongoing benefits that make that line stronger, and you can unlock your advanced orders when you pass the A, B, and C lines. In the corner of the board, there are symbols. Each symbol goes in front of one player. They place one of their soldati on each matching space on the main board. There will also be a number of neutral soldati that need to be placed as well, so that all areas will either have 2 or 3 soldati in them. The symbols will also show you the order to play. Whomever your arrow points to will be the player who takes their turn after you. Randomly decide the first player, and they get the first player token. Randomly deal out the character cards. Take the money and soldati as indicated into your headquarters as shown on the left side of the card. Then, starting with the first player, place more soldati or boats from your supply onto the game board in areas where you already have soldati. Finally, again in turn order, place out anything in the 3 section of your card, the drug labs, and the areas again containing your soldati. Finally, place grey influence tokens on all the grey circles. Then in turn order, one at a time, you're going to be placing 2 of your own influence markers below the grey ones. The map is split up into 12 mendamenti, each of which has 3 areas. White lines separate the areas, and brown lines separate the mendamenti. There are also 9 C regions. Now the game is played over a maximum of 4 rounds, and each round has a planning phase and encounter phase with a management period between the 2, and at the end of the round when you're going to be checking to see if there's a winning team. A team will win if a single player controls at least 5 mendamenti, or, as a team, one side controls at least 6 mendamenti. If neither side has that by the end of the 4th round, the team that controls the most mendamenti wins. Now during a round, you will do a planning phase, then an encounter phase. So let's talk about the planning stage first. Just to let you know, I'm going to go through the 2 phases at a fairly high level to keep this overview from getting overly long. During the planning phase, you're going to take 1 or more influence tokens from the top and move it to any open action space on the bottom. You can take any player's token, but if you use another player's marker, you'll have to pay them 1 coin. Now there are two basic actions when moving influence. You can either move a single influence token from the top to an empty action space in the bottom and perform that action, or you can move all the influence tokens from one column, and there has to be at least one, from the top to the bottom action sheet and perform the action above the column. When moving one influence token to use an action space, most action spaces can only have one influence token on them, with the exceptions of the ones that marked with an infinity symbol. Some action spaces will give you money, which is in yellow, or maybe cost you money, which is in red. And some action spaces will have a slash, which means you can do one or the other, and some will have a plus, which means you can do both actions. So let's quickly go through the actions. So you have recruit soldati. Move soldati out of your supply into your headquarters. The number you'll take will be based on your church row, plus what it says on the action space. Place soldati. Move soldati from your headquarters into one area, either one you already control or an empty area. The number you get to place, again, is dependent on the police row, plus whatever it says in the action space. Issue order. Place one order from your headquarters face down into an area that contains at least one of your soldati and does not already contain an order. I'll get more into these orders during the encounter phase, but essentially they are either going to supply that area or to an attack in a neighboring area. Organize equipment. Place a car, boat, or drug lab onto the game board. The launder money action just means you get one money for every drug lab that you control. Exert influence. Remove the leftmost influence from one of your rows on your player board. Depending on which action you take, you're either going to place it back into your supply, or place it in either an empty spot in the column with at least one other influence token, or an empty action spot in the bottom without taking that action. And there's the final action. By placing an influence token here, at the end of the planning phase, you can move it to an empty action space and perform the action as normal. Now, instead of moving one influence and taking an action, you can clear out an entire column, which will allow you to perform the actions listed above the column. Move all the influence tokens from a column, and there has to be a minimum of one, move them to empty action spaces, but you do not get to perform any of those actions. You must pay the amount of money shown, plus one money for every influence token in that column regardless of ownership. And finally, if you remove another player's influence token, you have to pay them one money as well. Once that is all done, you take the action above the column. Either take the first place token and place either a soldati, car, or boat following the normal placement rules. You can influence two institutions, that is, remove the leftmost influence marker from your player board from two different lines. One of the removed is put into your supply, and the other one goes into a non-empty column on the top or an empty action space in the bottom again without taking that action. The last is to influence just one institution from your player board. Remove the left two most influence tokens from your supply board from the row that matches the column that you just cleared out. These influence markers go back into your supply. All these three actions also allow you to put out an order. And as you remove influence markers from your board, you will increase the strength of that row, or it might reveal a one-time bonus. When you cross the A, B, and C lines, you unlock the matching advanced order tokens which are placed into your headquarters. When all the influence tokens are gone from the top part of the board, we move to the management phase. Here, you will see if any one player controls a mandamento. If you control two areas in one mandamento, you control the entire area. You can gain or lose mandamenti during this part. After the assessment is done, you then check to see if you have more, less, or the same marked control tiles. If you have more mandamenti than you have marked control tiles, then you can add influence tile to a control tile. These tiles are shared amongst the team members, but only one person on the team can have an influence token on the control tile, and only they can use that special ability. If you have the same number of mandamenti on the marked control tiles, then nothing happens. If you have less, you have to remove tokens from your control tiles until they're equal. Once that is done, we move to the encounter phase, and this is where all those issued orders will be revealed and activated. Flip them all over, and you're going to be triggering all the supply ones first. These are the ones with the green circles on them. And these can be done by all players simultaneously, and then you remove from the board, unless there is a white protection symbol on it, which will stay until the end of the round. If there is any questions on who goes first, they're going to go in numerical order from lowest to highest. Next, all the attack orders are done one at a time, again in numerical order from low to high. The movement and attack order is the only way you can take over a neighboring area. All the other types of attacks are only to weaken neighboring areas. In a move and attack order, if there's a rally symbol on it, you can pull cars and soldati from adjacent spaces. Next, you can move any number of soldati from the area where the order was issued into an adjacent area that you want to try and take over. Next, you calculate the attack and the defense. Your attack is calculated by adding up any number beside the skull in the attack order that you issued. Next, if you're attacking with a car, you can add that bonus from your justice row, the highest one of visible. Next, the defender adds up their defense from the protection vests of a supply order issued in that area, and each remaining drug lab gives the defender +1. If the attack is higher, remove defending soldati from the area and return them to the appropriate supply. If the defense was equal or higher, nobody loses anything, and you just proceed to the conflict stage. As the attacking family, you now have two options. You can choose finesse, which is you're going to be taking your 3 cards and choosing one. The 3 cards are the turncoat cards. Whomever reveals this will return 1 enemy soldato from the contested area and move one of theirs from the supply into the area. The other cards are the coward cards. Whomever reveals them will return 1 or 2 of their own soldati to their headquarters. Once you've picked a card, you place it face down in front of you. The attacking family will then decide to leave the defender's card in front of them or take it for themselves. Once that decision is made, the defending family does the same thing to the attacker's card. So you can end up with no cards, 1 card, or both cards in front of you. Reveal the cards and take the actions. Now instead of doing this finesse, the attacking family can just choose brute force, which is just removing 2 of their attacking soldati from the conflict back to their supply. Whether the attacking family went with finesse or brute force, you then proceed to the knockout stage. Take turns removing 1 attacking and 1 defending soldato from the conflict area until one side has no soldati left. If the attacker loses all their soldati, the attack ends. If the defender loses their soldati and the attacker still has at least 1 soldati left, then they have won the area. If there are drug labs in the contested area, you're going to be removing 1 of them. There are other attack orders. The strike attack, for example, allows you to throw a bomb into the neighboring area, to which you could sacrifice a card to get a bonus as shown on your player board. Either way, you add up the attack and a defense bonus as previously done, and if the attack is higher, remove the appropriate number of soldati. There are also double ones, so double move and attack and double strikes. As soon as you finish the first one, you just immediately do it again. It can be in the same area or into different areas. Now there are a few more types like the pentito and the agitate, which I'm not going to go into here as they are less common. Once all the attacks are done, you move on again to the management phase, and doing the same thing as before is by checking the board state. Then move the action sheet up to the top and reveal the next action sheet. Finally, you check for end of game. If a single player controls the 5 Mendamenti, or a team controls 6 Mendamenti, then you have won. If, after 4 rounds, neither side has won, whichever side has the most Mendamenti wins. If it's still a tie, then whichever side controls the Bronte area wins. And that's how you play. But remember, I have skipped over a lot of the rules, but hopefully it gives you a good idea of the game flow and some key concepts. Now, let's get back to see what I thought about La Famiglia, the Great Mafia War. On to theme and components. The theme in this one, as I said in the intro, I'm not a huge fan of Mafia media, but I have to say they integrate it pretty well in this game. There are drug labs to get money, you're using bombs to weaken your enemies, you're sending your soldati in to take over the areas. The use of cards and boats, the increasing your influence in the 4 different tracks and what you get as bonuses makes thematic sense. Now it is all tied to real world events that happened in the 1980s, but I found it abstract enough to kind of separate myself from it. So if you're interested in the theme, it does it pretty well and the actions are going to make thematic sense. For me though, still not a big fan of the theme, but you know what, impressed with the theme integration they did in this game. For the components, this is a big game, but I did like the components. The soldati are probably the weakest piece, just being cubes, but everything else was well done. And I like that there are boxes for everything. So when you set up, here yellow player, here's all your pieces. The setup is also pretty easy as well. You load up your player board and the board clearly shows you where your piece is going to go, starting pieces on the board. I also appreciate that you get a little reference card for what your opponents have. And you also have a little thing to share with your teammate. And I found that this was extremely useful. Quite often you are looking at this going, okay, you're going to go over here, I'm going to go over here, and we're going to do something over here. Now my one negative for the game pieces is the board itself. I'm not sure why it's just so big, but what can you do? Overall, I'm impressed with the components, and everything in this box has a useful purpose. On to the gameplay. I came into this game kind of on the fence. I'm normally not a big fan of cooperative games, but since this was a team game, it's not the same. I also find an area control and mechanism I'm not particularly drawn to, so I wasn't sure how this game was going to be for me. Well, happily, the combination of team play and area control really worked for me in this game. I really enjoyed the team play, looking at the special things my teammate and I could do and strategizing on where we want to concentrate our actions. You weaken them first because you have a good order that's lower in initiative order. Then I'll use my later move and attack orders to try and take over the area. Because you can't win this game by yourself. You need to be working with your partners so you're both on the same page on the direction of attack. If one person's going off doing their own thing in one corner, it's not going to work well. Now this can lead to one person dominating the conversation or planning, but honestly, I never ran into that. Or maybe it's the fact that I'm the dominating one of the teams I've been part of. Anyway, we'll skip that. The area control piece of this game is pretty standard. It's that action selection and orders which really set this game apart. That action selection is very interesting. You can use anyone's influence tokens from the top to the bottom, but if you use someone else's tokens, you have to pay them for it. That brings up two very interesting points. One, which I didn't go through over in the rules section, is that if you want to give your partner money, because money is fairly tight in this game, for every coin you give to your partner, you have to pay one to the bank. But if you use your partner's influence token to take an action, you can just give them the coin. For some reason, that just struck me as something I really enjoyed. I also like that when you free up your influence tokens from your board, and if you're able to put them back into the action area, you're not necessarily getting an extra action, like an extra work in a worker placement game, but putting an extra action for all the players on the board. And they're most likely going to be getting money back from that because someone else will be forced to take your extra action token at the end of the round. And manipulating that action selection, for me, was by far the most enjoyable part of this game. Clearing out a column can be expensive, but it can be very beneficial for you and can really mess up your opponents based on what they were planning, because you're going to be removing a number of actions that are going to be able to be taken during that round. Now, the game requires you to be watching everything your opponents are doing, but having that player screen kind of obscures, how many soldati they have in their headquarters, how much money they have, what orders do they still have available. Watching what actions they're taking and where they're placing things on the board is critical. And I was honestly invested in everybody's actions, trying to figure out exactly what they are up to. And because of that, you're also trying to throw the other team off the scent to make it look like your team is doing one thing when secretly you're planning something else. Because like on action 3 of you decide to pivot and do something completely different, which messes up your plans. Does it always work? Not by a long shot. But when it does, when you can mess up their plans or surprise them with something that they weren't expecting, that is so satisfying. I also like the ending in the game. Most of the games I played always ended before the end of the 4th round. Of course, we did have some games that went to the tiebreaker, but the majority, 4th round, and they were usually won or lost by doing one final push. If we attack here and win, and we can hold on to it, we won the game. If we lose this fight for this area, we're going to be on the back foot. Or if they attack us here where we are weak, can we withstand them for just one round so hopefully we can win? Now, I've been saying a lot of positive things for this game. And at a high level, I quite enjoy my plays of this one. The one negative for me is this rule set. This is not a game you're going to sit down the first time through and it's going to be slow because you're going to be making sure you're getting all the rules correct. And there are a lot of little rules to remember. For example, in the overview, I didn't go over the boats. I didn't go through the benefits of the cards or fighting with neutral territories and how that's different. Sometimes you get soldati back from the supply, sometimes they go to your headquarters. Sometimes you remove one soldati and replace it with another. The combat's a bit clunky. The idea of going for fitness with the cards or just brute force. The adding of the attack and defense, and are you bringing a car? Are there drug labs there, and so on. The basics of the gameplay are reasonably straightforward. The execution, not so much. Now, I do feel that this is a game you want to play with other people who know how to play it already. If everyone understands the rules, it is a really fun game full of mind games, and you can concentrate on the strategy and tactics. But there's a steep learning curve to this game. This rulebook is 20 pages long, and you kind of need to know everything on all 20 pages to really get the most out of this game. But every time I think, why didn't they cut that piece out of the rules? I think, I kind of like it. The finesse versus brute force. Why have both possibilities? But I kind of like that. Are we evenly matched? Then maybe let's try and finesse and get in each other's minds. Am I going to play a card that helps or hurts me in front of myself? So are you going to take it? On the other hand, if I'm able to build up a fair amount of soldati in an area that the opponents are not concentrating on, maybe I just want to brute force it and have a completely deterministic battle. So I don't want either option to go away. I might not always like those finesse cards because it does start to lose its luster after a while, but I'm glad there's another option besides just brute force. Just not sure whether the finesse cards are the best alternative. So would I recommend this one? For the right group, definitely. After my first play, when we all understood the rules and were able to concentrate on the strategy of the game, this turned out to be a really, really fun game. I like the components and just the overall look of this game. I really, really like the asymmetry of the families, and there are 6 different families in the box to change things up from game to game. And I fundamentally enjoyed that team area control aspect of the game. And honestly, because of this game, and because of how much fun I had, if there's an area control game, I will still probably say, I'm not sure whether I'm going to like it or not. But you say team area control, well, now you have my attention. I really enjoyed the action selection part of this game and how interesting those decisions were. I thought the tightness of the coins made those decisions even more interesting and added almost another layer to my decisions. This game also played into my love of trying to read other players. Why are they taking that action? How many coins do they have? I can't remember. Can I mess them up by forcing them to use one of my action tokens? And having a teammate to bounce his idea off was just a whole lot of fun. There's almost always an ebb and flow to the game as the families become stronger or weaker during the attacks. You can't turtle in this game. You just don't have the resources or the time to shore up every single area that you control. If you concentrate on one or two areas, your opponents are going to start picking off your weaker ones and gain controls of those Mundimenti. For the negatives, this game is 4 players only, and these can be harder to get to the table. And there's definitely a learning curve to this one, so you need 4 players who are looking for a heavier game. The iconography is definitely not the best, and sometimes you're just going to have to memorize what those things are because the iconography doesn't make sense. In this game, the box says lasts 90 to 180 minutes. I would definitely say it's on the higher side of that. The game also, I feel, really requires multiple plays. The first game is not going to be smooth. I'm also not a huge fan of those finesse cards. The first couple times you do the whole, would I put a bad card in front of me and knowing that you would take it, or does he know that I know that he knows, that type of thing, it leads to some randomness, and often you just kind of have a count that you could lose a couple soldati using these cards. So maybe it's just better to make sure you have 2 expendable and just go for brute force to guarantee you the win, but I kind of like that there's that option. Overall though, I'm going to give this game an 8.5 out of 10 and a Dice Tower Seal of Excellence. This game very much surprised me. I went into thinking I'm not a big fan of pure area control games, but with the team aspect to this one it really changed my mind, and next time I see a team area control game, I'll be more inclined to want to get that one to the table, and for me, that's a huge plus. But that's it for the moment. Until next time, thanks for watching.